Alright guys, and welcome to my next video. This video is going to be the first video in a series on how to build a computer in its entirety. This video is going to be purely educational, and I'm going to run through some of the tips and tricks that I managed to learn along the way building my computer, or even after I had built my build. In order to build a computer or a tower, you're going to need 8 main parts. First up is going to be your CPU or your processor. This is the central processing unit that allows basic arithmetic, logical control, and input and output operations to be dealt with on the computer. It acts as the brain of the computer. Second up will be your case, or your chassis as it's called. This is going to house all of your parts, and it's going to essentially be a shell. Next, you've got the RAM, which is your random access memory. It allows data items to be read and written in the same amount of time, regardless of order in which data items are accessed. RAM comes in the form of sticks, and it be slotted right into what are called DIMM slots on your motherboard. Next up, you got your power supply. This is a unit that will give power to your build. It allows the motherboard to work. Next up, you have storage, which would be your mechanical, your hybrid, or your SSD drives. This is going to be used to install programs, to install your operating system and load files directly. Then you've got your motherboard, which is essentially the mainframe of your computer. Everything plugs into the motherboard in your build, and it is mounted inside your case. Next up, we got your CPU cooler. As processors do a hefty amount of work in any computer, they tend to generate heat, and you want to try and dissipate that heat away from the CPU. That's why there's loads of different alternatives for CPU coolers. You have air type cooling, liquid type cooling, lots of different things, but you need to have a CPU cooler in your build. Last up will be your GPU, or graphics card. This is going to be a must for people that are building gaming computers. GPU stands for Graphics Processing Unit. Okay, so when I said earlier about this video bringing together the tips and tricks that I have learned along the way of making my build, I have to say, from building my computer, I have learned an awful lot. It is a good thing for anybody to do. It's not too hard to do. But I'm going to get into two of the main things I'm going to talk about in this video. First of all, I'm going to talk about a website called PC Partpicker. Now, PC Partpicker is a website that essentially holds a database of all computer parts you could think of. You pick your parts out and you place them in this build log. And if there's going to be any issues with your build, for example, if there's compatibility issues with some of the parts, or if a part is too big to fit inside your case and you haven't bothered checking the measurements, this site will notify you of any problem that you may encounter when building your build. It is absolutely fantastic. It's a great website to use for anybody. It also gives you a estimated minimum wattage, which is a very handy thing. Basically, with your power supply, the different power supplies have different wattages, and for example, some of your computer parts may draw more power than others. You might find out that you might need a higher wattage power supply than what you first thought because of how power hungry your components are. So it's always good to look for the minimum estimated wattage for any build, whether it be on PC Partpicker or whether it be using a power supply calculator, which I'm also going to talk about later in the build. Alright, so for purpose of this video, I'm going to put in my parts for my build just to show you how this website works. So CPU, for my build, I managed to get a hold of a 8-core processor, an AMD FX 8320. It's got 8 physical cores. It's a great processor for gaming, and you know, I haven't had any faults with it at all. The processors overvolt, undervolt, overclock like champs. If you have a good cooling system. My CPU cooler, I happen to get a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo. It's a very popular air cooler. It is sufficient for all of my needs, and it also can be used in practically any motherboard slot out there today. It's compatible with nearly every processor slot that I can think of. For my motherboard, I had a Gigabyte G970A DS3P. I picked this board because I had an MSI board before that, and it didn't work out too well. A lot of problems with the board. MSI had to recall them, so I ended up getting this mainly just to house my components because I needed a motherboard. Plain and simple. Memory, I went and chose 8 gigs of Corsair Vengeance. 8 gigs of RAM, sufficient for my needs. As far as storage goes, I have 2 storage drives on my computer. I have a 120 gigabyte solid state drive, which is Samsung 840 EVO, and it houses my operating system. I have my operating system saved on it, and it is absolutely fantastic for anybody that wants to have a real fast computer. SSDs are a fantastic invention, and they are very, very, very fast. They are very good at housing operating systems. I also have a 1 terabyte Seagate Barracuda mechanical drive for saving all my programs and my games to. For my graphics card, I decided to go with the GeForce GTX 970. I bought this card just after it had launched, and I thought it was a very good card performance wise for the money that I was going to put down for it, and it handles every game I want to play on my computer flawlessly. For my case, I happened to get a hold of a Corsair 300R. Very, very nice case. Does the job for everything I need it to. For my power supply, I went with a CX750M Corsair modular power supply, 750 watts. It was very, very good. It was a great idea that I had recommended to me by Joker Productions to get a modular power supply, because I wouldn't need that snake of cables, because modular power supplies only run on the cables that you need for your particular build. You have every single cable plugged in. You can plug in any cable that you need into your power supply to run your build. It's a very, very, very effective technique, and it's going to be very good for cable management, which will consequently help your temperatures inside your build, which I'm going to go into later on in the series. Okay folks, so that's our 8 parts. So as far as this goes, I've clicked the compatibility check, and it brings it down and it says some AMD 970 chipset motherboards may need a BIOS update prior to using Viscera CPUs. Now, my processor is a part of the Viscera line for AMD. When I built my computer, I didn't require a BIOS update at all, so that's only suggesting that some chipset boards will need a BIOS update. That doesn't mean that you will definitely need an update. There's also here, it says unable to verify that the Corsair 300R would have sufficient space to hold the Zotac 970 4GB amp Omega video card. I can say that this is the case because I went and looked prior to my build and checked the measurements for the card, and although the card is bulky, taking up 3 PCI lanes, it fit in my case really well. So looking back at the website, you can see the grand total of the parts, so to say. And another thing that PC Partpicker does, which is a very, very, very good implementation, is it will give you the cheapest price for the parts and tell you where to buy them. Obviously, a lot of people could be a bit pedantic about things like this and want to order them all from the same seller, which I can totally understand, but for the likes of this website and helping people out and literally giving them the most financially viable option, it's a very, very, very good thing that the site does for anybody that doesn't have the money to splash out any extra to go and buy all from the same seller. This is a good feature, but it's not always accurate, because although they may give you the cheapest price, it might also be coupled with very, very high shipping or delivery fees, so you always need to be wary about that and look around. You know, The great thing about the internet is you can literally have so many tabs open at the same part, and you can see exactly what it's going to cost you from which seller, and you can find the most financially viable option for your needs. Okay, so although I've picked out these parts, some people that haven't a clue about computer parts will go, well, how did you know how to pick these parts? Well, the only main thing you need to worry about when building a computer is the processor socket and the motherboard. Motherboards are built specifically with one given processor slot, and they are also built for a particular company's needs. For example, I use an AMD CPU, so I need an AMD based motherboard made by an aftermarket company. So aside from that, the only other thing you really need to look at is your memory. Now, certain motherboards will only support certain frequencies of RAM. Now, when I say frequency, it's the speed at which the RAM runs. Now, when you first build a computer, the RAM will automatically be set to the lowest frequency possible. However, if you are someone that wants to go with overkill parts and have the best of the best, you can buy RAM that has really high frequency, and that's fine and that's all well and good, but the thing is you need to make sure that your board supports this frequency. Now here, when I've clicked into the Corsair Vengeance, the RAM that I have, you can see here it says DDR3 1600. Now 1600 is the frequency, 1600 megahertz, as to how fast the RAM runs, and DDR3 happens to be the series of RAM that it comes from, because certain boards will support DDR3 or DDR4, which is very new at the minute, and you need to make sure that your board will support this RAM, not just with the frequency but also with the particular slot and the technology. So aside from this, looking back on all the parts of the build, we should be looking for an estimated wattage. Now over here at the top right, you can see it says overview 379 watts. Now I know that my system would probably draw more power than that, mainly because I do run a little overclock on my graphics card the odd time, and any kind of overclocking for any particular part will require you to have power available for it, because you're essentially stretching the component more than what was intended. So you need to make sure you have a bit of headroom. So for me, having a 750 watt power supply and having a supposed rating of 379 watts, I have more than 300 watts headroom, which is absolutely loads for if I ever wanted to overclock or do anything like that. Personally, with me, when I was using power supply calculators, I didn't pay too much attention to PC Partpicker. I actually went out of my way to find a PSU calculator by typing it into Google and getting one that people said was like official and good, and you'll dial in all your parts to it and it will give you an estimated power rating, and it is probably a better and more true representation as to what kind of power your build pulls from your PSU. A little thing to note as well is that, like, in your computer you're going to have fans for cooling all your components and different things. You're going to have a fan on your CPU cooler as well. Fans and any kind of like storage drive, whether it be SSD or mechanical, they require very, very little amounts of power. The things that, when you're talking about power and wattage, that you need to be careful of is graphics cards and CPUs, because they are the power hungry, power intensive pieces of the system that you need to be careful of. So now that we've picked out our parts and we've seen that they're all compatible and we know that the build should hopefully run well, we're going to move into another part of the series where we're going to build this build in particular in its entirety. I'm going to run down more tips and educational things that'll help you on your way to building your own PC. Until next time, my friends, goodbye.